Metro and Future just dropped a collab album, and as expected, the production on the album is crazy, and there's so much you can learn when making beats. To start by setting the tempo of this track, Metro tends to use a little bit of a fast-paced style BPM like 143 for example. One thing I always notice about Metro's melodies is they tend to have a lot of vocals incorporated into them. A lot of the synths, a lot of the plucks, a lot of the leads, they tend to have like a little bit of a vocal in the background. They almost sound like a vocal. So I have this pad here. I find the best place to start is with the chord progression, which sets the whole kind of vibe and emotion of the track. I'm going to click this drop down, go into view, go into scale highlighting, and I'm going to pick a scale for this track. I'm going to pick minor natural. I feel like this melody here perfectly captures the kind of dark but energetic vibe of Metro melodies. I'm going to duplicate this melody. So we have this first version of the melody here, and in the second version I'm going to turn it into a chord progression. I think Metro does an amazing job of blending different melody layers into the background, so they can come in later in the track, add a lot of evolution, but you don't really notice that they're there, and it doesn't distract from the artist that's actually rapping or singing at the time. So I've added this kind of background block here. I also noticed lots of bells in the melody, so I'm going to go and add this bell here. I'm going to go and grab the chord progression that we made earlier, paste it on top of this bell, click Alt-A, or you can use a similar kind of arpeggiator tool in your DAW, and what we have is this melody here. I have this bass here. It's going to be different to the 808, but I want it to kind of come in so we can bring it in as a bit of like a bridge or a bit of an intro. I also have this kind of lead here, which can slide really nicely, and I decided to bring this in. If you think this is too many layers, you'd be absolutely correct. I'm not going to bring all of them in at the same time, but when I'm arranging this beat, I'm going to show you how Metro tends to bring his layers in and out, and how it can really help with the evolution of the track and can stop your beats from sounding boring. I'm going to grab some drum samples from the Emotional Essence library. What's so amazing about this sample library is you can basically just pick whichever emotion you want to make, and for this album, for example, it's kind of energetic and bouncy. You can click on that folder. And this is just absolutely perfect for a Metro album. And there's the stems and MIDI, of course. But let's grab some drum samples. Grab this 808 here. Clap. Grab a crash. I'm going to grab a few different hi-hat samples, and you'll see why later on. We have this one, which is kind of like a lower pitch, quieter hi-hat. We have this one, and then we have a kind of standard sounding hi-hat. Open hi-hat. Metro uses lots of perks in his beats. I'm just going to grab some of these. I think the key with perks is to grab some that sound like actual real drum samples. I'm going to grab this transition, which is going to be used later in the track. This snare here. I usually don't grab this many drum samples, but in a lot of the Metro beats I heard, there's lots of beat switches, there's lots of bridges, there's times where the whole beat completely changes, and I want to show you how that's done by using these different drum samples and creating different drum sequences. I also got carried away because the Emotional Essence library has so many good drum samples. The link is in the description if you want to download that. I'm going to start with just a two-step hi-hat pattern for now. I'm going to go and make some of these snare sequences. So you can see I've layered these snares on top of each other. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make them off-grid. For example, this snare here. I'm going to click Ctrl A, I'm going to hold Alt and move it slightly backwards. There's no real rule when doing this. I just go and grab them randomly at random times, and it makes it sound so much more realistic. We're also alternating the samples. I have this clap sample which is coming in every second snare. So we have a realistic sounding kick. and also a punchier kick here. I'm gonna grab that punchy one. I'm gonna click record. I'm gonna record a kick sequence for this beat. To make your beats not sound robotic and repetitive, I like to lower the volume of some of the kicks besides from the main kicks. So when you have the kick at the start of the bar, at the start of the fourth bar, and also on a chord change, like this one for example, I wouldn't necessarily lower those, but all the other ones I lower them just a little bit. I'm going to grab this kick, copy it on top of the 808 up here, make sure cut itself is turned on. I'm going to follow the root notes of the melody we made earlier. I'm going to change this 808 with a slightly longer one. So when I add different 808 slides and 808 fills, I tend to not change the original notes of the 808 that the kick is hitting on. I tend to add in notes before the kick, for example, which means the kind of higher pitch 808 is almost immediately cut off like this. I'm actually going to lower the BPM just a little bit. And I'm going to chop up some of these hi-hats. Metro tends to have the occasional hi-hat fill. I'm actually going to delete the last 4 bars, go and make the first 4 bars really unique, and then go and duplicate that. One of the things I'm going to do is just mess with the velocity slightly, just by adding random little spikes in it. I'm going to do the same with the pan as well. There's probably a faster way to do this. I'm going to go and move some of these just off the grid slightly, which is going to make it sound so much more realistic. If there's a note that you feel like you want to take out of your hi-hat sequence, but you feel like it'll sound too empty without it, like this for example, and you want to keep the rhythm going, but you want to add the bounce of kind of taking out different notes, you can lower the pitch and lower the volume of the hi-hat so it kind of blends into the background. I'm going to change the magnet to 1/2 step. Click on this one and slice it up by clicking Ctrl U. Now we have this separate hi-hat sample here. I'm going to add some lower pitch hi-hat notes in here like this. There's kind of 2 main places I would add an open hi-hat. One would be just here on the second beat, and the other would be right before the snare comes in and it leads into the snare nicely. So this is the first one. And the second one is a bit closer to the snare. This one is a little bit more bouncy, whereas this one is a little bit more kind of syncopated and it stays with the rhythm. And you can alternate. If you want to go and move the hi-hats all at a time in one go, you could just select everything, hold down Alt and move it all to the side, or you can do them kind of individually if you don't want the whole hi-hat sequence to be slightly at a time. I'm going to add this perk in. Now if you couldn't tell, this beat desperately needs to be mixed and mastered. I'm going to select all of the layers, go into the mixer, Ctrl Alt L, which is going to add all of them. I'm going to go through one by one and add some different effects and EQ to each of these layers, starting with this first melody here. We have this chord progression. I'm cutting out some of the low frequencies so it doesn't clash with the other layers in the melody and the 808. So I added a very simple gross beat effect to this kind of bell arpeggio, which I think sounds awesome. We also have this sub bass here. I'm going to pan the hi-hat slightly over to the side, just add a little bit of reverb. I'm also going to add an EQ and slightly cut some of the higher frequencies to make it sound a little bit more kind of dark. Now I'm going to go and increase the volume of the track. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can use a soft clipper, you can use a maximizer, you can use a compressor. I'm just going to grab the not clipper. This is what the beat sounds like all together. All these layers are never going to come in at the same time, but this is just an example. It's pretty insane, so obviously this all needs to be arranged. I'm going to split it by channel, grab all of the layers, drag all of them in just like this. So one thing I learned from the intros, it tends to just be a simple kind of layer coming in. Sometimes the beat comes in the intro, but usually there's a melody for about 8 to 16 bars. So I grabbed these 3 melody layers here. Like these sound the most mysterious and will fit in here the best. One layer I'm going to try to not forget to add is this transition here. So we have this intro, which is a couple of the melody layers. We have this kind of verse here, which is 16 bars. This is very simple. We just have this melody layer coming in. Then when the beat comes in, I take out everything except for this one chord progression here. Then we bring in a few more melody layers. And we have this kind of mini drop at the end of the first 16 bars of the verse, where just the kick and the 808 come in, and that leads into kind of like the hook, which is a little bit later. This synth is kind of really fat and really intense. A lot of Metro's beats won't quite be this intense, so if you're going for a little bit more of a chill layback style beat, you don't have to use something this intense. When I've brought this layer in, I also took these bells out to kind of leave room in the melody. To add some evolution, I've taken out the chord progression with the last couple beats left, and I've taken out the hi-hat, and then we bring it all back in. This is probably my favorite part of the beat. We bring in this sub bass and the bells on their own with just the beat, which sounds really raw, and then this leads into this second kind of drop where just the chord progressions come in, and I think it sounds so simple, it's so fire at the same time. Which then leads into this mini drop here. The cherry on top is this transition here, which adds so much tension leading into the drop. So just like that, this beat is basically finished. There's so many different styles that Metro uses. Some of the beats are really, really simple. Sometimes there's beat switch ups halfway through and it completely changes the style of the beat. There's so many different ways to kind of capture the mysterious trap style vibe that Metro perfectly captures on this album. I think picking a minor chord progression, picking some really spacey wide chords, and having some really high quality drums. I hope you learned a lot from this video. If you want the samples I use when making this beat, click the link in the description to get the Emotional Essence library for 90% off. There's over 10,000 royalty-free samples and MIDI. I guarantee you so many of them would be perfect for making beats like this. I'll see you in the next video.